March 25th, 2023. Well, a week has passed, and apparently uh, the DA there in Manhattan has backed off for the moment on indicting Trump, although he may do it next week. I understand that he's had a little trouble with his grand jury, perhaps, and I tend to think that the real power brokers in the Democrat Party are trying to tell him to back off, maybe, because I think they think it'll spoil the atmosphere for what they really have planned in D.C. with the special prosecutor. So we'll have to see what happens next. So far, so good on that. And by the way, also at the end of this, I do want to make a few comments on what's happening over in Syria right now. But the main topic of this presentation is the idea of the kind of the background of what we might call the deep state activities against President Trump, and in the context of other deep state activities. And I'm thinking particularly about JFK, because that itself is a whole controversial subject that probably has been around for almost all of my life here, except for the first few years. You might say that what actually happened with the assassination of President Kennedy, and how does that figure into what's happened since then. And that's a little off my normal topic, but I thought might as well go in there and kind of get into that this time. Basically, what I'm suggesting is I've been looking into the issue of the Kennedy assassination, and I've been watching a whole bunch of YouTube videos called America's Hidden History or something like that by Eric Hundley and Mark Geber. And these are kind of interesting, trips down memory lane there of the sort of, all the assassination, all the rumors, all the conspiracy theories, and a lot of things I think that are pretty factual too. And I have some other information I put together over the years and kind of putting it all together. I'm not going to get into any great detail, but I want to look at one basic idea. The standard, official position of the Warren Commission was that it was all done by one lone communist nut, Lee Harvey Oswald, using his cheap Italian rifle, and that from the sixth floor of the Texas School Book Depository building, and that's basically it. And of course that involves a bunch of whole things. But one of the issues is that I think I have resolved pretty clearly over the years. I think is that the question is, was Oswald actually a communist, and or what was he? And I think that it is pretty clear cut, at least, that that is quite the contrary. I mean, you're dealing with a person who, as a teenager, joined the Civil Air Patrol, managed to join the Marines at 17 with his parents' parental consent, and was assigned to a base in Japan where the U-2s were flying from to spy on Russia, and then ended up being discharged from the Marine Corps, and then defecting to Russia, and then coming back. And that seems a little bit strange for a communist joining the Marine Corps, but there's a little bit more to it. By the way, if you like these videos, give me a like to help out with the algorithm, and more subscriptions would be appreciated. Okay, but what I think really is interesting, it gets into what was he really doing in New Orleans before moving to Dallas in the days of the assassination. And the summer of '63 beforehand, it's pretty clear cut that he was actually involved with a guy named Bannister, who was a ex-FBI agent, a fierce anti-communist, and was definitely engaged in activities against any pro-Cuban, pro-Castro Cuban activities, and supportive of anti-Castro activities, including the aftermath of the Bay of Pigs and attempts among some anti-Castro Cubans, to launch another such an effort. And when you look at what he was involved in that summer, I think and the fact he was operating out of the same office that Bannister was, it's almost clear cut, I think, that he's definitely not a communist. He actually was probably a U.S. government intelligence asset, and he may have been a person with some personal problems, and some troubles, and therefore all I'm saying is when he actually ends up in a book depository building doing whatever he did, whether he was the shooter or whether he was the patsy, the key fact is he really appears to be an asset of the intelligence community of the U.S. And therefore, even if he did shoot the president, that tends to put a certain wrinkle on the Kennedy assassination in and of itself. If he didn't, and if he was just a patsy, then that indicates a conspiracy. But in any event, I think it shows that there really is something hidden there. And remember that President Trump had promised he'd release all the Kennedy assassination information that had been kept secret all these years, the roughly 5% of the documents that have yet to be released. And yet, when it came down to it, he didn't release all of it. There's still some left behind. And I understand that I was reading the other day that in a conversation with Judge Napolitano, who used to be a commentator on the Fox News, and apparently had some incident that got him removed. But at any rate, won't go into that. But the point is that that in a phone conversation with Trump, he was asked why he didn't release all of it, and Trump basically said, well, it's really bad, and it just wouldn't be a good thing to release this, and that's why he decided not to. So, and he also told him they might tell him about it later, but he wasn't going to talk about it on the phone. And considering that people do tend to have been listening in on the phone, I guess we can see why. So anyhow, I just thought that's an interesting thing that also kind of strengthens the idea that something was wrong with this whole Kennedy assassination and the Warren Commission. There's a lot on that, and I suppose many of you have heard about some of it, and people have different attitudes on the subject. But I just thought it kind of fits into a pattern that actually several presidents have run into trouble with the deep state, much to their dismay. I mean, you have Kennedy assassinated, and like I said, even if it was Oswald, he was obviously an intelligence asset. Did he just get out of control and go rogue, or what? Well, at any rate, or was he a patsy? But then we have Nixon. We have to realize that Nixon was also CIA assets were involved in blowing the cover of the Watergate break-in, and a deputy director of the FBI was the so-called deep throat character that was the informant to Woodward and Bernstein that supposedly led to his downfall and the investigation and his ultimate resignation. And that he was also raising the issue, apparently, in a code word form of the whole Kennedy issue. And I'll okay, so here's basically, I'll go into how that goes. He referred to it as the Bay of Pigs. But the thing is that most of the information we have is if it was a conspiracy, that was the people involved in the Bay of Pigs who ultimately were behind the assassination conspiracy. And as I said, even Oswald was involved with the pro-Castro Cubans pretending to be anti-Castro in New Orleans. Well, that seemed to have backfired because it didn't effectively stop them from doing what they did to get him out of office. And so that's another issue to look at here. So the next thing, we could get into other issues, and of course I won't go into things about, let's say, Robert Kennedy, or let's get into things about maybe even Reagan and the Hinckley issue, which would really get into more controversial and exotic subjects. But then let's look at going to President Trump and his travails. I mean, as soon as he was, as he was running for president, from almost the outset, when it looked like he was gaining some strength, you can see that the deep state efforts like FBI and I think also State Department and probably other intelligence community efforts sprung up to create this so-called Russia hoax, as it's called, where they tried to create an environment where they could try to oust him with some kind of an impeachment effort or to force a resignation or whatever. But he also has felt continuous problems with these same kind of characters. So I think when you look at the history of this thing, there's a whole history, and like I said, there are probably issues that relate to other people here too, maybe even Reagan and the Hinckley incident, but which is a little more controversial how that might have happened. But essentially, what you have is such a long going thing, a decades long situation with the influential deep state characters really managing presidents and in cases trying to remove or actually removing or destroying their policies or damaging their policies over this whole period in order to create control. So it's almost like the country does have an oligarchy of sorts behind the scenes that's pulling the strings on much of what actually happens. And I think that's basically the message I have on this subject. I don't want to go too deep into all this video. I don't. There's plenty of material out there if you're interested in following it and all that. And certainly the stuff I mentioned there, America's Untold Stories, there's a lot of material there. And I'm not endorsing it 100%, but maybe 80. I don't know. A lot of it's good, I think. A lot of maybe 50. I don't know. Anyhow, a lot of it's good, but some of it's questionable. At any rate, but I'll be wrapping this up a little bit. But I do want to mention a little bit on the latest developments here, the attacks on our troops in Syria. And of course, the question was raised: why are they there? Well, we'll recall that after Trump had organized an effort to basically knock out ISIS or pretty much destroy most of it, although not completely, because remnants still remained. There was an issue. There was some oil fields there in I guess eastern Syria, out in the desert, and there was a concern that these ISIS terrorists would take control of those fields and basically sell the oil on the black market and get money to support their terrorist activities for weapons and other things they need to maintain their organization. And that's why they were there. But now it looks like Iran has become emboldened, perhaps because of the deal that they just made with China. Remember, I mentioned in the previous video that China had negotiated a diplomatic relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran that had been broken off for years. And now Iran is starting to use its surrogates to start attacking our troops, and apparently wounded several and killed a contractor. So, I mean, I think this is going to be a bit of an issue here coming up too. And also, I suppose it will serve a bit as a distraction from what's going on in Ukraine also. And remember, Iran and Russia and China are kind of working together now. So these are issues we'll be tracking. By the way, I'll be posting this also on Rumble as always as a second backup channel. And of course, the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. And all for now.